Do you ever look at someone and wonder, what's going on inside their head? The first line of Disney Pixar's Inside Out tells you everything you need to know. These aren't just children's movies, they're whimsical, emotionally intelligent, and surprisingly grounded lessons in developmental psychology. These films walk us through the architecture of the mind, with surprisingly accurate models of cognition. The parts of the self that are usually invisible are made visible. Think we can't do a deep dive on a Disney movie? In this episode of Dr. the Psychology, we're breaking down the visual metaphors of the Inside Out movies to their correlates in the psyche. Because the more we understand what's going on inside someone else's head, the more we understand our own. You don't need to be an expert to understand the mind. You just need a good story to show it to you. If you've never given much thought to why your mind works the way it does, you're about to see just how much of you lives beneath the surface. Get ready. It's time to feel what thinking looks like. The machinations and mechanisms of the mind. 11-year-old Riley has a good life in Minnesota. She's loved, supported, athletic, goofy. Her emotional world is stable, until her family moves across the country to San Francisco. Riley's journey of emotional growth starts not with a dramatic crisis, but something far more familiar. A happy child facing her first real challenge. We begin just after Riley's born, opening her eyes and peering up at her parents for maybe the very first time. Our first emotion, joy, springs into being and steps tentatively into a vast empty space. This room, which contains nothing but joy, and a single small podium with one big button, is infant Riley's psyche. Untouched, new, and born from the id. What joy sees through Riley's eyes is simple but profound, a quiet, private moment between parents and child filled with love and mutual awe. When Joy pushes the button on the podium, a glowing orb the same color sunshine yellow appears. A mirror image of the newly created memory is faintly visible inside. It was amazing. Just Riley and me. Forever, Joy says. This is Riley's origin, not just of consciousness, but of inner life. In the very depths of her being is an emotion, not a word or thought. The thoughtful way Inside Out depicts mental phenomena is firm and definitive. In one brief scene, they seamlessly present a huge and hugely simple psychological truth. Before the mind is constructed, all we are is the affective self. A lot of people might think it's thoughts that make us feel bad, but this is quickly dispelled without a word. Emotion creates thought, not the other way around. We feel our emotions, physiologically, before they're ever put into words. That's all life is for around the first 2 years, existence encoded pre-verbally. Our deepest and most intuitive knowing exists without words. We feel it without really knowing why. The body knows the truth, even if the mind can't explain it. In fact, those that struggle to feel or identify their emotions, due to early or pre-verbal trauma, typically require somatic and mind-body connection-based techniques to gain awareness of what has no language. All the talking in the world can't symbolize what first has to be felt. That first tiny kernel of self, the being rooted in joy, is all it takes to get the ball rolling, literally. A curved guide rail materializes, and as the orb rolls around the room, Riley's nascent psychic architecture comes to life. Devices and gears organize like neural conduits, interspersed with bright colors and floral motifs. This is Riley's mind, churning mechanical parts interconnecting into something like an emotional transportation system. Over time, we see how the system grows. The tiny podium expands to a broad console with new buttons and levers as more emotions show up to be regulated. The walls are lined with shelves and shelves of memory orbs, hundreds and then thousands. Memories are moved, sorted, and stored. And one pathway, disconnected from the rest, reroutes to a separate compartment, protectively hidden unless deliberately accessed, and designed to hold only 5 orbs. These are Riley's core memories. Unlike the ordinary memories that line the walls, these specific experiences are so emotionally saturated and effectively rich, they anchor tethers that stretch outside the bounds of headquarters to floating personality islands. These early, high-impact experiences are Riley's internalized reference points for the self, foundational events that shape the personality's structure. A playful goofball who actually loves being honest and is defined by hockey, friends, and her parents shape the basic roots of who she is. The personality islands exist outside of the direct experience of headquarters, like fixed landmarks in the broader terrain of the psyche. Research on early personality formation will say the same. From one lens, these are self-object experiences, the interpersonal interactions that support a stable self-image. From another, they're schemas, implicit memory templates that serve as cognitive shortcuts to understanding and making sense of reality. That her personality is tethered to core memories means that her personality is grounded in what's called cumulative continuity, early patterns of behavior or temperament that become increasingly stable over time. The point here is, not all memories are created equal. We live 365 days a year, but don't remember most of those days. The memories we carry forward, dragging forth year after year, gain a place of prominence. They generate meaning beyond the moment itself, extending across time and shaping who we are. That's what it means to be a core memory. Overall, what we see in headquarters is a sophisticated visual conceit of metacognition. It means exactly what it sounds like: thinking about your thinking. Metacognition is the ability to step outside of your own mind and observe what it's doing. You take a step back and realize, I'm feeling really overwhelmed right now, instead of just being overwhelmed. You think, I always spiral out when this happens, instead of actually getting pulled into the spiral. You're not just having a feeling. You're watching your mind have that feeling. Riley isn't just experiencing emotion, but organizing, categorizing, and revisiting it. Watching her work to make sense of her emotions teaches kids, and adults, that feelings don't just happen to us. There's a process behind them, and when we can see it clearly, we begin to build emotional awareness. Primary colors, primary emotions. The emotions dominating Riley's earliest years aren't just random character choices. They're what affect theory recognizes as primary emotions, innate and biologically hardwired responses to survival-related stimuli. Infants show signs of primary emotions within the first year of life, in specific, universally recognized facial expressiveness. If your therapist has ever given you a feelings wheel, they're the big, broadly defined emotions rooted in the center. Even those who struggle to identify and label what they're feeling are typically able to identify primary emotions: mad, sad, glad, bad. Riley's initial control console is tiny because she doesn't have any emotional range yet, and Joy's in charge of the console, not because she's Riley's first emotion, but because she's the central organizing one. We know this theoretical stance is intentional because when we briefly flash into the minds of others, they don't necessarily have Joy at the head of the table. Riley's mom has sadness at the wheel, and her father has anger. We even flash briefly into the mind of a young boy, dumbstruck by eye contact with Riley. His inner world is full of skate ramps, empty pizza boxes, amplifiers, and grunge and punk band posters in a dank, dimly lit dungeon. His emotions are panicked and reactive, basically melting down in sensory overload. He doesn't have anyone at the head of the table. His emotions are all just running around in anarchic disarray while an alarm blares in the background and a flashing red sign repeats, "Girl," over and over. The boy's impulsive, chaotic inner world stands in sharp contrast to Riley's smooth and neatly ordered control room. His emotions are in panic mode, executive functioning is nowhere to be found, and the entire system short-circuits at the sight of a girl. It's a funny exaggeration, but developmentally accurate. Adolescent brains are like this, especially when flooded by novelty, attraction, or social threat. When Joy first arrived, she had one brief moment alone with Riley before sadness showed up. Baby Riley started crying, so sadness is just doing her job to correctly orb what Riley's feeling too. This explicitly argues that the organizing principle of the self is a tension between opposites. It's a kid-friendly version of the archaic self-split of Freud's dual drive theory. Eros, the drive toward life, connection, and pleasure. And Thanatos, the drive toward withdrawal, stasis, and symbolic death. Joy even says to sadness, "Where I go, you go." This is an elegantly understated point about what exists at the root of the self. Visually, it's clear that almost all of Riley's orbs, her baseline affective tone, is biased heavily on the Joy side of the binary. Her normal self is a personality being formed in a predominance of positive, not negative affect, and it's Joy's job to keep it that way. When the other primary emotions show up, they mainly play supportive roles as Joy tries to keep sadness from tainting Riley's memories. Fear keeps Riley safe by detecting threats and dangers in the environment. And disgust arrives to help Riley identify broccoli as aversive stimuli, amusingly seen later in the film as a deeply embedded subconscious threat to Riley's survival. Anger shows up last, and typically has the least to do. While the other emotions remain subordinate to Joy's lead, sadness isn't really allowed to do her job the same way. Joy keeps intervening. She even admits that she doesn't really know what it is that sadness does for Riley. Joy sees sadness as something to protect Riley from, a threat to what they're trying to build. And that matters. Whoever's in charge of the console is the one who defines the internal world. If it were sadness instead of joy, Riley's entire emotional landscape, and therefore her behavior, coping, and identity, would all be fundamentally different. It matters who's at the wheel. At Riley's first day of school in San Francisco, she starts to introduce herself, cheerfully sharing about her life in Minnesota, the lake they visit every weekend, the hockey team that her dad coaches, their family traditions. But mid-sentence, something shifts. That version of her life no longer exists. They won't go to that lake every weekend anymore. Her dad doesn't coach her hockey team anymore. She's not going back to her old life. The memory, which began as joyful, begins to change. The golden glow fades to blue as Riley's awareness catches up to her reality. Her world isn't the same as what it used to be. Sadness helped her see that. Joy quickly tries to stop sadness from altering the memory, but it's too late. The entire orb turns blue. While Joy freaks out, sadness insists the orb has to go into the core memory bank, but Joy won't let her. They tussle over it, ultimately getting sucked through a memory tube all the way to the back of Riley's mind. Without joy and sadness, everything starts to unravel. If you blunt one emotion, you blunt them all. If you turn one off, you turn them all off. You can't spot check emotions. Since Riley is blocked from feeling sadness, she can't feel joy. Without the emotion that's defined her whole identity, Riley doesn't know who she is. It's precisely because Joy keeps trying to prevent Riley from experiencing genuine loss that she's no longer tethered to her emotional truth. So she begins acting out of character, the personality islands disconnecting from their tethers and literally falling apart. The other emotions try to replicate what Joy would do, but it comes out wrong, funneled through their emotional tones. Without joy and sadness, all emotions will be filtered through anger, disgust, and fear. Self-splitting occurs because joy won't allow two truths to coexist at once. "You're hurting Riley," Joy insists. "If you get in here, these core memories will be sad. I'm sorry, but Riley needs to be happy." Joy's wrong. Riley doesn't need to be happy. Riley needs to be real. And sometimes that means conflicting things. In trying to protect Riley from sadness, Joy reinforces the split, keeping Riley at a place where emotional complexity is treated as a danger rather than a sign of growth. The most important point is, sadness isn't contaminating the memories. She's updating them. She changes them so that they reflect the continuation of narrative time. Even though the memory itself didn't change, its emotional tone evolved. If Joy doesn't allow that to happen, she's going to stunt Riley's growth. You don't get to stay in that one feeling at a time phase forever. Life doesn't stay emotionally simple. Feelings intersect and bleed into each other, forming richer shades of meaning. Trying to find her way back to headquarters, Joy comes across a forgotten memory that sadness remembers. What Joy knows is that the hockey team celebrated, lifting Riley on their shoulders. But sadness has both sides of the memory. Before that, Riley missed the game-winning goal, and her parents came to console her. Joy split that part off to help ensure Riley saw herself in a positive light. Sadness, often a culturally devalued emotion, is reframed here as necessary for empathy, connection, and meaning. When Riley runs away, it's grief and loss that drives her back to her parents. In the end, with the help of her parents, Riley integrates the split. The orb intermingles both colors, mostly gold, but tinged here and there with blue. The developmental phase resolves successfully, and the control console more than doubles in size. With multiple emotions now able to operate in tandem, the range of possible effective combinations expands dramatically. The film makes its point beautifully. Loss is easier to integrate when the core self is already suffused with joy. There's room for pain when your foundation is stable. New feelings, old self. Life is back to normal for 13-year-old Riley in the sequel. Her core memories are blended now, able to hold multiple emotional truths at once. Without relying on splitting, Riley now has defense mechanisms. The Riley protection system that keeps the best and tosses the rest. Her personality islands are now much bigger, a zany playground of sensory overload so hyperstimulating you'd almost miss Family Island. It's become crystallized into a small marble statue. Riley's relationship with her parents fully internalized now. That makes it the perfect time for Friendship Island and her new wider social world to take center stage. Early development progresses by seeing the self through increasingly larger mirrors. Remember, we become who we are by being seen in the eyes of another. It's a joy to be hidden and a disaster not to be found, in the words of D.W. Winnicott. Puberty marks the stage where mirroring moves beyond the family system into the wider world, and the self may appear in reflections it doesn't recognize. As the mirrors multiply, the odds increase that you'll be seen as someone you don't believe yourself to be. Puberty is the time when the inner structure has to hold. The self has to say, "Even if you don't see me clearly, I still know who I am." Riley's at a crucial stage of development where unfortunately many people get stuck. Identity won't consolidate if it remains dependent on being seen correctly by others. Many people struggle because who they are changes from person to person, from mirror to mirror. So what stabilizes the personality now if it's seen through a potentially unlimited number of funhouse mirrors? The psyche has to lean on something deeper. Trust in your emotional reality has to be bigger than any wrong mirror. Internal structure compensates for lack of external attunement. If not, you risk collapse into the reflection. The mirror can lie, the self has to learn not to. The two movies bookend each other in terms of self-construction. Seeing the inner self, the personality formed from core memories, creates personality islands, the structure. Then, being seen by others, forms a belief system, an understanding of self. We need both for narrative coherence, knowing who we are, not just being who we are. If you can be who you are but don't know who you are, or if you know who you are but struggle to be who you are, one of these phases didn't resolve fully. Deciding who you think you are for yourself, especially under another's gaze and without reinforcement, requires great strength of character. Up till now, identity is externally co-regulated by the parents. We see many scenes in the first movie of Riley faltering and being shored up again by her parents' reassurance. At puberty, that scaffold gets dismantled. Her parents only show up at the very beginning and very end of this movie. Riley's on her own. External validation substitutes the support needed for a not yet fully formed self. If the first film is about knowing who we are, the second is about who we think we are. Puberty's not just a physical transformation of the body. It's a neurobiologically timed and encoded recalibration, refined and conditioned by social mirror feedback. We only get two major windows of full-scale psychic reorganization: the rapid neuroplasticity of infancy and the structural overhaul of adolescence. Puberty is the final chance to meaningfully rewire attachment patterns and personality structure before the psyche's architecture solidifies neurologically. Let's try to briefly run through the dense neurological part, or you can just skip ahead to the next chapter. There's the massive synaptic pruning. Weaker or lesser used pathways are eliminated to strengthen and optimize neural circuits. It's like taking a dirt road and repaving into a highway, faster and more efficient connections. That happens from more strategic and targeted myelination, essentially sheaths that act like insulation over electrical wires, allowing signals to travel faster and more efficiently along the neuron. There's heightened dopaminergic activity in reward centers, magnifying motivational drive. External cues become a major regulator of self-perception, because the brain makes social acts feel more rewarding than they did before. The increased salience organizes meaning, what matters instead of just surviving. And of course, increased sensitivity in the limbic system, essentially the control room, causes the intense emotional reactivity teens are known for during this time. This global reorganization is destabilizing to the nervous system and initially dysregulating. Dopamine surges without a corresponding increase in inhibitory control. The prefrontal cortex matures slowly while it stitches together many large-scale networks. There's a mismatch between emotional drive and cognitive oversight without full executive regulation. That's the part that's building now. Riley's already internalized a lot of positive core beliefs about herself. Her parents are proud of her. She's a good person. She's kind, brave, and a winner.
I'm strong, brave. I'm a really good friend.
But most of all, she's a good friend. Riley's going to hockey camp over the summer with her best friends Bree and Grace. She's looking forward to tackling high school together, but then they drop the bomb. They got assigned to a different school. Riley panics. Bree and Grace will still have each other, but Riley will have to move forward without a social safety net. Suddenly, this summer's camp doesn't seem like fun, but the only chance Riley has to secure her place in a new social order. Overnight, a demolition team arrives at headquarters and starts smashing up the control room, making a huge mess. After all, puberty is messy. The console becomes hypersensitive to touch, causing Riley to overreact to the slightest emotional or sensory input. And before the primary emotions can even understand what or why puberty's causing this, new emotions show up. There's envy, who wants to mirror and be mirrored. Embarrassment hides inside his hoodie, doesn't speak, and struggles to make eye contact. Ennui seems to represent emotional deadening, behaving aloof and bored. But most of all, there's anxiety. Anxiety is, well, anxious. But she's earnest and eager to help, desperate to protect Riley from the threat of rejection. Riley's secure attachments meant she never had to face the idea of social exclusion or isolation. She's individuating from her parents at the same time she's losing her social support, so her pivot toward survival at all costs makes sense. The question she has to answer for herself is, at what cost? At the developmental point where parental safeguarding is supposed to internalize as stable self-worth, anxiety refuses the handoff. She wants to keep that regulation outsourced to peers, approval, and performance. Joy trusts Riley's moral values to maintain her beliefs as long as she's true to herself, but anxiety knows it's a much surer bet to gain that validation from others. A reactive self-concept doesn't need to believe in itself. The responsibility for self-worth remains the outside world's to manage, same as it did with the parents. The self doesn't have to learn to regulate if others are doing the work. Anxiety, embarrassment, and the others represent secondary emotions. What we tell ourselves our feelings mean. You might think it's good and healthy to cry and feel better after, but another person might feel worse, finding it an unbearable show of weakness. The emotion's the same, just the narrative's different. Riley fears social exclusion, and if you want to fit in, that's bad. But if you don't care about or feel the need to fit in, being excluded is neutral. Even good in some respects. With secondary emotions at the wheel, Riley becomes what's called externally directed, attending and responding to the cues received from others rather than the ones that come from the inner self. Anxiety wants Riley to conform to perceived social expectations, not feelings. At first, anxiety's adaptive. She helps Riley course correct when she appears to alienate herself from the older girls on the high school hockey team. Girls Riley sees as an anchor in a world that's starting to feel increasingly adrift. But anxiety quickly shifts into overdrive. As far as anxiety is concerned, the better Riley is the one who won't be alone next year. This is the central conflict of the sequel. Joy wants Riley to trust her authentic self, and anxiety thinks it's safer to be what others expect. Joy and the others do begin to pay more attention to external cues, but they're doing so from the position of authenticity. She tells anxiety she's laying it on too thick to get back in the team's good graces. But for anxiety, there's no such thing as too much sacrifice of the self if it achieves the social reward. One thing is clear, the sense of self driven by emotional truth is not the same as the one driven by anxiety. The need for security is so great, anxiety will do whatever it takes to latch onto that external anchor, even if it means sacrificing the pre-existing sense of self. Riley's emotional world has become more complex. Too complex, anxiety insists, for the original core emotions to manage. To her, they're outdated, insufficient, too simple and naive, too emotionally honest. And to be fair, she's not totally wrong. Joy does falter navigating this choppier terrain, getting Riley in trouble and turning the older girls against her with her immature behavior in the first place. Navigating social nuance does require more than just acting from gut feeling, especially in environments where emotional authenticity isn't always rewarded. Despite claiming to be eager to work together, anxiety quickly bristles right past incorporating Joy's perspective in guiding Riley's behavior. She brusquely and unceremoniously catapults Riley's carefully guarded sense of self into the back of the mind, using the same Riley protection system Joy fashioned to protect Riley's positive self-image. Joy and the others are literally bottled up, emotionally suffocated, and sealed off from influence. Anxiety acts as if Joy and the others are liabilities, reminders of a simpler time that doesn't understand the stakes of social exclusion. While the first film only split off joy and sadness, the second suppresses all of the primary emotions, who spend the rest of the film trying to find their way back to headquarters. Burying the core self can always be justified in the name of survival. When anxiety takes over imagination land, essentially Riley's dream world, cutely depicted as a house of cards, she simulates scenario after scenario for Riley to anticipate how to react to failure and disappointment. Fun, right? Joy and the others wrest back control and simulate scenarios that gratify Riley's needs. Things like succeeding instead of failing, imagining her future career based only on what Riley might like and who she might want to be. They simulate Riley's real dreams, not reactions to fears. If anxiety's at the wheel, who Riley really is doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is who she's perceived to be. To be clear, a certain degree of anxiety is necessary in order to correctly attune to others. But that only works if anxiety's not the only driver of behavior. After Joy and the others steal Riley's imagination back, the house of cards, the fragile construction of reality built from fear, literally collapses. Riley's finally able to sleep without anxiety's endless simulations of reactivity. That anxiety, embarrassment, envy, and ennui are Riley's secondary emotions mean they weren't her primary emotions. Think about that. A lot of people would probably say anxiety's their dominant emotion. Joy, and even sadness and loss, are much more elusive to access. Many people, especially when it comes to trauma, actually develop so that their secondary emotions are perceived as primary. They believe cognition is emotion. It's crucial to recognize that's not true. It's a developmentally incongruous way to perceive reality and an inversion of the natural directionality of perception. It's abnormal, and it shouldn't be happening. So whenever you catch yourself, or someone else, trying to make sense of what's happening from thoughts without effect, imagine that this is what reality is like if joy, sadness, and the others actually never made it back to the control room. The inside self and the outside self are one and the same. Joy points out that Riley's core beliefs guide her to make good choices. The core memory of helping out a publicly embarrassed Grace, who disgust calls a social Titanic, solidifies Riley's belief in her own goodness. Putting someone else's needs above her own, even if it means risking her own social standing, is proof positive that she's a good friend. In terms of theory, Riley's at a key developmental intersection. Kohlberg's stages of moral development and Erikson's psychosocial stage of identity versus role confusion. She's currently operating at the level of conventional reality, where social expectations and group norms shape right and wrong. Kohlberg estimates only 10 to 15% of people ever reach post-conventional moral reasoning, the capacity to uphold self-chosen ethical principles that transcend societal rules. So when Riley refuses to snub Grace, even though her peers would, she's acting in alignment with the higher, universal ideal of kindness, despite the conventional norms of her social microculture. We answer Erikson's, "Who am I, and who can I be?" when we act from integrity, even at our own expense. These films offer a remarkably accurate depiction of normal personality development through the character of Riley. First, emotions organize personality. Later, that personality is understood through the internalization of a belief system. Although Riley's only 13, she already has a strong sense of who she is because both layers align. That's not extraordinary. That's exactly what should be happening. Identity consolidation, and even developing toward post-conventional morality around this age isn't precocious. It's developmentally typical. What gets labeled as advanced is often just progression from secure attachment, intact self-esteem, and normal emotional maturation. Identity diffusion well into adulthood evidences a developmental delay. Riley's not ahead of the curve, that she's not struggling with her identity. She's just developing along the typical trajectory. The challenges Riley's facing are exactly the kinds of dilemmas that make or break identity consolidation at this age. Do we remain aligned with our core values, or abandon them for social reward? She knows who she is, but that knowing is fragile if she lives in misalignment to her beliefs. Identity fragments when behavior contradicts values. Actions are concrete. We can't just toss them off even if we think we're different from what we did. Identity depends on consistency between belief and behavior. Riley's suspended between two selves, the one shaped by shared history with Grace and Bree, and the one she's trying to construct under the gaze of the varsity team. Riley idealizes Val Ortiz, the varsity captain who made the hockey team as a freshman. It's not just about new friends or social acceptance. She legitimately looks up to and respects Val as a role model. The more Riley's sense of self is shaped from abandonment anxiety and social approval, the more inauthentic she becomes. Increased self-referential processing means she's so self-conscious about the way she walks, she can't stay present in conversation. It's embarrassing to be seen as even walking wrong. Envy drives Riley to like the same things Val likes and think the same way Val does. Riley eats food she doesn't like and lets Val think she's from Michigan when she's from Minnesota. The idea seems to be, you will be rejected if you express any difference of opinion or preference. In truth, behavior is no longer driven by primary affect. Every expression that comes only from secondary emotions is inevitably false. When envy says, we need a band they think is cool, not something we actually like, Riley starts veering down a potentially irreversible road. The older girls don't dislike her favorite band. They've just outgrown it. In order to maintain sameness, Riley has to pretend she's in a more mature developmental place than she is. So ennui steps in and sarcastically deadens Riley's true enthusiasm. Unfortunately, this gets witnessed by Bree and Grace, who know Riley's being fake. From this, we get a really interesting visualization of how the real self gets disconnected from the false self. Back in the psyche, Joy and the others are trying to use the unguarded, flowing stream of consciousness to work their way back up to Riley's control center. When Riley sarcastically mocks something that is deeply meaningful for her, a sarcasm opens up, creating a gulf preventing them reaching the other side. There are mind mechanics on the other side, but everything the emotions call out to them gets lost in translation. We really need your help, and you're the best crane crew ever means something totally different when said sarcastically instead of earnestly. Riley's past joys can no longer reach her because they're interpreted as embarrassing, naive, and cringe. The workers think they're being taunted and walk away without helping. But the scene makes a deeply fascinating point about how devaluing what you value affirms inauthenticity and damages the inner world. A thought formed in joy compounds joy over time. Anxiety's intentions are sincerely good, and she genuinely does want to protect Riley. But a thought formed in anxiety can only compound more anxiety over time too. Anxiety, the emotion, is oriented toward possibility, not reality. And possibility is endless. The more you think, the more there is to think about. Its function by design can never resolve itself or close its loop. Behavior's unnatural by definition because the self's being guided by the world it imagines, not the one it's living in. Riley's anxiety shifts from adaptive logic, if I'm a firehawk, I won't be alone, to self-erasure. If I like what they like, I'll have friends. At first, anxiety's pleased to root more and more of her orbs into the base of Riley's identity, but is appalled to hear the core belief of the new anxiety-based self. I'm not good enough. The identity in the control room crystallizes around it, and the other emotions hear it too.
I'm not good enough.
Ennui asks, aren't we good at hockey? But it's not about being good. It's about being seen as good. The core belief will persist despite objective data to the contrary, because it's not coming from that. It's coming from an internal schema that depends on controlling something that can't be controlled, the perceptions of others. As Riley becomes increasingly desperate to prove herself, she's convinced she must literally show them she belongs.
If I'm a firehawk, I won't be alone.
She dyes a red stripe in her hair like the rest of the team, erasing her identity physically. If in the final game Val showed she was good enough for the team as a freshman by making 2 goals, Riley has to show she's good enough for the team by making 2 goals. Riley knows better than the choices she's making, but she's mistaking real things you can see as evidence of what can only be believed. Riley, who's a good friend and a good person, can't be mirrored by the anxiety-based Riley who believes she's not good enough. By trying to prove something that can't be seen, she makes real something else, hurting her friends, as she physically knocks Grace down. She didn't see Grace or do it on purpose, but that's what happens when you're blinded by fear and a desperate need for security. You unintentionally hurt people. This is the moment Inside Out 2 stops being a charming metaphor for growing up and becomes a brutally accurate portrayal of identity fragmentation. Sitting in the penalty box, Riley isn't just overwhelmed, she's dissociating. Anxiety literally freezes in place, manning the controls in a complete frenzy, trying to restore a collapsing system. Joy jumps into the whirlwind, but she can't make contact. Her hand literally goes straight through anxiety like she's not even there. Riley's not there anymore either, panicking and clutching her chest, struggling to breathe. She's anchored to nothing as she's untethered from her core values, her relationships, and now even her body. It's a visually masterful depiction, not just of a panic attack, but of the very loss, the disintegration, of the true self. This one's not a metaphor, it's literally what happens. Anxiety doesn't heighten performance, it consumes identity. Anxiety thought having already built up 13 years' worth would make it easier to install a new identity. But all it did was create an irreconcilable split between the 2 competing selves. Seeing proof that violates the core belief in her own goodness, Riley becomes its opposite, a bad person. Joy tells anxiety the only way to stop this is to let go. She doesn't get to control who Riley is. But very quickly, we learn, Joy doesn't either. If Joy hadn't defended so many bad experiences out of awareness, Riley's sense of self wouldn't fracture under contradiction. She'd know feeling bad doesn't make her bad. Joy returns some of the orbs catapulted by the Riley protection system, and we watch the sense of self transform in real time, threading and rethreading itself over and over as Riley integrates her conflicting selves.
I'm selfish. I'm kind. I'm not good enough. I'm a good person. I need to fit in, but I want to be myself. I'm brave, but I get scared. Success is everything. I make mistakes. I'm nice. I'm mean. I'm a good friend. I'm a terrible friend. I am strong. I need help sometimes.
Anxiety is a compensatory form of trying to control the unknown. It's a cognitive bias that makes worrying feel responsible. If you anticipate the worst, you won't be caught off guard. But anxiety doesn't prevent the worst. It just forces you to live through it early and repeatedly, even when it never happens. You suffer in advance and call it preparation. Anxiety's not a safety net. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy of feeling bad by making yourself feel bad. You sometimes have to fail. You sometimes have to get it wrong. You can't learn if you insist on safety over growth. What seems like protection is often grief for trust being broken, usually far too soon, usually in silence. If you say, "I'll never be blindsided again. I'll know everything in advance," all you're doing is replacing trust with control. First, the inside determines the outside. What we feel guides how we act. And then the outside determines the inside. How we feel about ourselves is a reflection of our choices. If the sense of self is built from the gaze of others, you see yourself from the outside in. True identity means seeing yourself from the inside out. And guess what? Riley made the team. Hey guys. We hope you had as much fun as we did deconstructing the visual messages of Inside Out into their psychological themes. The writers interviewed psychologists, specialists, and neuroscientists to visualize these concepts, and it really shows. They did a great job translating really complicated abstractions into easily recognized intuitive frames. Metacognition, sometimes used interchangeably with reflective functioning, is part of what's called mentalization-based therapy. To think about your own thinking and to work to understand the thinking of others means, as it's framed in MBT, to see yourself from the outside and others from the inside. Without reflective functioning, it's the other way around. We struggle to see ourselves as others see us, while simultaneously judging others only by what we can see. Funnily enough, our team exemplified the conflict of whether to be true to the self or be beholden to others when we couldn't get this episode done on time. We know it's not a big deal, but we made a commitment to keep to a certain schedule, and we almost stressed ourselves out keeping it. We were much later finishing this episode than we wanted to be, but we had to create something aligned with the value system of what we want to contribute. Sacrifices have to be made, and it's on us to decide what kind. I'm Dan with Dr. The Psychology, and for our next mini-episode we're sticking with the theme a little longer and explaining the inner child, what it actually is, where the idea came from, and why it's not supposed to be in charge. If you like this episode, take a second to like, subscribe, leave a comment, or share with your friends. Take care, and we'll see you next time.